Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at the RG podcast. This is Isaiah Diesel, joined with a very special guest, Mr. Almost a Doctor. Can I call you AAD? Ad?
Yeah, that'll do. I'll
Okay.
happily take
Almost
that, or
a
you can just
Doctor.
call me Matt if that's easier.
Matt. Obviously, I didn't want to give away your name, so but
First
there's some
name's
people.
fine. First name's fine.
There's some people out in the ether who can't handle the idea that somebody might have a dissenting opinion. So we know how those people are, and that's
There's
not the
also a
kind of
lot of
channel this
people that
is.
would do bad things if they got personal information, so I can
I
understand that
know
one.
exactly, which is why I use Diesel. Not that I personally mind using my name or anything, but it's just people. Yeah, some people just can't be grown-ups. But that being said, can you tell me where you're calling out of today, mate?
I'm out of Sydney, so yeah, Australia, so down under. Apparently, the land that doesn't exist, according to some people around the globe. But well, some of those people probably don't believe in a
Yeah.
globe. But yeah, I'm here. I think
But
I'm real.
here's the real question. If you're in Australia, it's not down under, it's just here. So do you guys just say here?
We refer to ourselves as down under occasionally, but normally we just yeah, it's just this is where we are. We don't think about it too much. So yeah, it's a good point. Because in physics, up is relative. So
right.
If we're talking like up, like for me, it's that way. But if I was to be where you are, I'd be pointing in the opposite direction. It'd look down to you. But as long as we define our term, you define your terms clearly in physics, you're fine. Particularly with directions. You say, this is what I'm defining as, up, we're good.
So I want to get this started off on a good note. So I want to get on your good side. So I'm going to start off with a little joke, a little physics joke. Is that all right?
Maybe go for
this one.
Yeah, it's not as though I have a 4-minute video.
And Heisenberg and Schrodinger are driving in a car, and Heisenberg is driving extremely fast, and he gets pulled over. And whenever the police officer sees that he has out of state license plate, he says, "Hey, do you have any idea where you are right now?" He's asking him in a sarcastic way, and then he says, "Do you know how fast you were going?" And so Heisenberg says, "Well, it's impossible to know how fast you are and where you are at the same time." Maybe I butchered that a little bit, but anyway, yeah, okay. So then the police officer says, "You know what? I'm tired of your attitude." He says, "I'm gonna have to search this vehicle." So he says, "I'm gonna need you to pop the trunk for me." So he goes and he pops the trunk, and he sees that there's a dead cat in the trunk, and he comes back around. And he says, "Hey, do you guys know that there's a dead cat back here?" And Schrodinger says, "Well, I do now."
Yes.
Yeah,
I do like it.
Got it. All right. So, can you tell me real quick, like what it is that you're doing, or studying?
So yeah,
you start off right there.
Yeah, I have a small YouTube channel that I do on the side, which is hence I use my name for Almost a Doctor. I like doing science videos, but my background is in science. I'm currently doing PhD in physics, and I have also done a fair bit of chemistry in the past as well. I'm building gas detectors for environmental monitoring, and I'm technically in an astrophotonics group, but I do like some other aspects of physics. I mean, astronomy does fascinate me a lot, and I do I've done a lot of study for that too, because you can't get through a physics major without looking at least a little bit of it. But it's kind of interesting the level that we go into. I like kind of looking at the depths there. Gets complicated quickly though.
Right. So I took a little bit of astronomy in college, but that was like 20 years ago. So I might be a little bit rusty, but I do think it is one of the most fascinating subjects, because just how vast it is. And so I actually do have some kind of astronomy tattoos on my arms, and I actually have a crescent and a star on my back, but that's actually was more for Islam. But so it's going to be interesting to have that conversation. But before we do, we like to have a friendly fire round, and this one is specifically going to be about maybe Australia and astronomy. So are you ready for that?
Yeah, let's give it a shot.
Okay, so Crocodile Hunter or Crocodile Dundee?
They're so different though. Like it's like a movie, or do I want to watch? That's a difficult one. Probably
Hunter?
Crocodile Hunter. I'd have to go probably
Hunter.
Steve Irwin because I just because I probably learn a lot more, and I do like that. I do like watching those sort of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was
Just
cool.
for the
It's a
record,
pity.
90% of, total pity, but 90% of American knowledge about Australia came from Crocodile Dundee, because we all watched that when growing up. But then the other 10% came from the Crocodile Hunter, as you guys like to say. But okay, if you had to own a koala or a kangaroo, which one would you rather own?
Oh, kangaroo. Koalas are
Kangaroo. Okay.
docile or aggressive. They're really
Right.
silly animal. Actually, they're not the brightest. Whereas kangaroos are fairly. I just have a kangaroo. But
you ever see that one where that kangaroo's like really buff? He looks like he's in prison. He's like he's flexing.
yeah,
like that.
That's how they look.
Pretty funny. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Favorite Australian beer, but I'm just gonna assume it's Foster's.
You can't buy it
Foster's.
here. I actually, as a joke with some of the others from Six Pack, we went looking. You can't buy Foster's here. It's not an Australian beer. No one here drinks it because it's horrid.
Really? Because in the commercial they say Foster's beer, Australian for beer.
Yeah, no one in Australia drinks Foster's. It's not an Australian beer.
So what favorite beer?
Oh, that's a hard one. Depends on the mood. If I'm thinking just a favorite Australian beer, depends. I like going exploring because there's a lot of like niche breweries around. So like I got to go to like the Little Creatures over in WA once. That was nice.
Okay.
But I'm the sort of person that doesn't tend to have more than one beer because it's a little bitter for me. But there are some good ones, but it depends on where you go. I said I like the niche breweries that tend to have smaller batches. Those something a bit different, basically.
And so here's the last question: if you had to colonize any planet in our solar system, which one would it be?
As in, all the technology to fully go there is given.
Terraform. It's called terraforming. Is the technical term?
I'd be tempted to say Venus just because I'd love to see how that would actually go. I'd just love to turn Venus, which the like almost molten ball of raining acid, into somewhere that you could live. That's just kind of an impressive feat. Like it's so hot that would melt on the surface.
My favorite, one of my favorite, definitely top 5 sci-fi of all time. I'm a big sci-fi nut as far as film, but would be Total Recall. So I think they colonized Mars.
The original one, though.
Oh yeah, the second one was, as you guys say, shite. It was shite. Okay, so here we go. Or is that a UK thing? You guys also say shite?
Some people do.
Okay. All right. So if you can tell me real quick, you are an atheist, correct?
I don't believe in a deity or follow a religion.
A deity. I love how you change an EI into an A. That's incredible. A deity. Okay. So how about this? Where would you rate on the docking scale from 1 to 7? 1 meaning you believe in God, 7 meaning you don't. Where would you put yourself?
It depends on which one you're talking about. Because in terms of very specific versions, so where someone lays it out, say like a 100% like literal reading of the Bible, I would be pretty much a 7, as close to a 7 about anything that I could, because I don't believe in like absolute certainty, because we're humans, we can be wrong. But if we're talking about a more general concept, then yes, a little lower down on that scale, because
like a 6.8 or 6.
I don't go around saying it's impossible. I'm happy if someone presents me with information that shows that something that I would happily call a god exists. Go for it. I want to see that. And one of the things is I work alongside a lot of scientists and have worked alongside scientists who are very religious, and we get on really good. I like having those
Sure.
conversations. I find it quite interesting. So yeah, it really depends on exactly what claims and what part of it that we're talking about, which is why I like the question. It's a good question to kind of narrow down on what people believe, but I find it for me a little hard to answer without
That's
more specific. So yeah,
so
hopefully that does help, because it might kind of give an idea of where I'm coming from later responses.
Sure. And so, can I ask you this question? Was there ever a stage in your life that you did believe in a deity? Or did you say deity?
Yeah.
Deity?
Yeah, I was.
And around what age was that?
I was in early 20s when it kind of started to. It wasn't a fast process. I didn't just give it up overnight, but slowly through early 20s.
I think, yeah, I actually had that. I went to Bible college my freshman year, and if there's something that'll turn you into atheist, it's hanging around a bunch of Christians. I'll tell you that, because that definitely did it for me. And but I did have a spiritual journey. As I told you, I have some Islamic tattoos. I got some various different tattoos of the world religions as I was traveling around in different countries and looking into different things. But okay, that being said, I have an interesting question, because you have somewhat of a cosmology background. So I was wondering if you could tell me, there's first one, this is kind of a big one, but is the universe infinite?
It's actually a really good question, because it kind of opens it up. So when I'm thinking physics and people say infinite, we're talking about kind of, it can just keep going, like things can physically keep going and it just expands out infinitely. And that question is actually really difficult to answer, because one of the things that would prove that it's not is if we can detect curvature to the universe. If the universe is, say, space-time itself is curved, then if you kept looking, and whilst it's not physically possible to actually see this far, but just as a hypothetical, let's say you can see infinitely far, you would be able to keep looking and see the back of your own head if the universe is curved kind of right round. Now, there have been a lot of models that have been proposed that indicate different shapes, because it may not just curve around like that. It may curve away. You may get like almost saddle type shapes. It gets really complicated. But
right. I've seen those. One of them is kind of like a donut. It looks kind of like a donut.
Sort of, yeah. But it depends. The ones that I've heard the most on, and that might just be because of the people I interact with in physics, and the people I know from that, and just the information I've come across, tends to be the debate between, is there some curvature versus no curvature? Because if there is no curvature, then you could probably say the universe is infinite, which is where I'm going with this. The problem is the universe might be so big that we can't see the curvature, because one of the experiments they do for that is exactly how you would tell that the Earth is round. You take 3 points on the Earth and you look and you line them up, and you take all the angles and the maths, and you see if there's a curvature to them. You can check by what they see of each other. The problem is it might be like the issue that a lot of flat earthers have. They look at the Earth and say, well, this bit looks flat, but it's just because the perspective is too narrow. It might be that we can't, it curves so slowly that we can't actually physically see the curve. It's too big for us to detect. And so it's actually a really hard question to get down in terms of exactly how big the universe is. In terms of how wide the matter part of the universe, when we think about it, is, we know that's about 93 million billion light years. Like, we know the matter part of it, but whether that can keep going infinitely is a different story.
Right. So my best friend, was my best man when I got married, his name is Dan, and he's a physicist as well. So we sometimes have these conversations, and I can make it about 10 minutes where I actually understand what he's saying, and then he starts going off into some other territory. But he was kind of talking about these various shapes, and what he was saying is that if the universe is flat, then the only thing that could stop the universe would be nothing. And when I say nothing, it means that something that doesn't have any matter in it, and it doesn't have any space in it. So it's
so like a low energy vacuum.
Well, but even a vacuum, even saying that the vacuum, let's say you had a vacuum that was this big and we removed everything out of it, that's still some kind of space. So
there's
it would
still
literally
stuff
have to
in
be
it because of quantum mechanics. Yeah.
Yeah, so but there's still space in it. So basically he was saying that it's not possible in physics to have nothing. So if the universe was flat, that would be the only thing that could stop the universe. And it's kind of funny when you think about it, if you say that nothing is the only thing that could stop the universe. Well, it's kind of like has like a double meaning, right? It means that there isn't anything. So it's not possible,
Well,
and it has to be infinite. Good.
It gets very complicated because studying the systems of what would happen when we get to these extremes is basically impossible. And
right.
And so if you're talking about the universe itself, what we would think of as a vacuum still doesn't have. It's still like it might be empty space, but there's still particles in it because quantum mechanics. You'll have virtual particles popping in and out. So that's why they tend to refer to a low energy vacuum. And it might get to the point where the universe is so spread out that things essentially stop in one way or another, but it's actually quite complicated. And that's not the side of it I've gone into too much. But that's...
Good.
No, sorry. I was just... I had a thought.
Did you ever see the movie? Can you finish your thought, please?
It's an interesting question, but I think the best you'll get from any physicist is there are a lot of models and there are different, and it's quite specific in that it's like if this model is true, which we can't quite test, then we know X, Y, and Z. Well, we know X, Y, and Z, and if this model is true, it means the following. And same with these others. But the problem is that we can't quite test which model is going to happen because we don't have access to that. So now whether we might one day, that's okay. One of the ones I quite find is fascinating but slightly scary is that if we fast forward this galaxy 1 trillion years, you wouldn't be able to tell there was a rest of the universe because everything would be so far away you couldn't physically see it. In 1 trillion years, there would be no way to tell that there was a Big Bang or there was an expansion of the universe with our current models.
Yeah.
I think
they call that like the particle horizon where you can't see past it. So when people talk about the universe being 93 billion light years, as you called it, the physical, where there's physical matter or whatever, there's only so far you can see. So it's like you could never know how old the actual universe is, or how wide it is if you could only see up to a certain point. Now, if you're going to talk about, there's a difference, and I thought it was very interesting that that Lawrence Krauss was talking about. I know you know that guy, but he was talking about how within our one universe there might be a multiverse in a sense that there might be different areas where different physics exist. It's kind of like all in one area, but you can never leave. You would never be able to leave that universe. So that would be your entire universe was just this one area. Oh, good.
I tend to lean towards the newer idea of the bouncing cosmology rather than like I know Lawrence Krauss has a lot of fascinating ideas, but I think I'm siding, and most physicists at the moment are leaning more towards something like the bouncing cosmology idea, which is a bit different in some senses.
Like a big crunch, you mean?
No, this is, well, it can involve them. Yeah, it's quite complicated, but it's getting a little beyond what I've studied because it's actually, I managed to finish my major as that was starting to come out, so it wasn't quite in the things we were taught. But but one of the quotes I really like, although actually no, I might keep that quote for the next question because I think it fits in
next number
really
2
well with that one instead.
Did the universe begin?
So this is one of my lecturers, I was listening to a talk he gave. So it was on a podcast called Shirtloads of Science. It's a really cool podcast. And
Shirtloads?
Yeah, Shirtloads of Science, like a t-shirt.
That's clever.
And yeah, so his quote was, in terms of talking about cosmologists, he said, most cosmologists now don't think there was a point at which the universe had no yesterday, which is a very interesting way of putting it. Doesn't look like the universe did begin in a traditional sense of it, because I do need to make it clear is that time doesn't behave normally once we get down to the weird and wacky scales that would be involved at, say, the initial expansion of a local universe. And even with a bouncing cosmology, the idea of a beginning becomes really complicated. I'm happy to say that our local universe had a beginning, our local instantation of the universe probably did. But long term, like in terms of does the cosmos, the whole thing, have a beginning? Maybe, but it doesn't. We don't have anything that would indicate there's a definitive start point of everything. Because as I said, time breaks down, and at our stage, we don't have the theories to kind of match like quantum gravity and deal with time at those scales. And so I'm kind of on the side of that quote of, there isn't really a point at which the universe had no yesterday. There isn't a point at which you can say today is when the universe started, where there was no previous time for it. I don't think that's quite how it flows.
Hard to make sense of that, but let me ask you a quick side question. Have you been watching any of the Winter Olympics?
Yeah, I've been catching bits of it.
Yeah. I can imagine Australia doesn't do too well in the Winter Olympics because...
Well, we're doing all right. I've got a couple of medals. No, we're doing okay. We don't do amazingly, but we've had particularly like surfboarders, like the snowboarders and skiers. We've had a couple of decent ones. Like one of us, it was replayed quite a bit. One of our snowboarders did really, really well, and I saw what they did to get. I think they got a bronze medal. One of the early events. I can't remember what it was called. Sorry, but I did see their performance. It was pretty epic. They deserve the medal. So yeah, we don't do brilliantly, but considering we don't really have proper mountains, we do all right.
You're right, exactly. You don't. So it was funny because last one, the last Olympics in Pyeongchang, which is in South Korea, where my daughter was born. Actually, she was born right in the middle of the Olympics, but which means she's turning 4. She's just turning 4, so that's exciting. But the people from the Netherlands were just kicking arse. I'll call it arse in the speed skating. Okay.
Oh yeah. So, I saw some of them.
So a couple of things to factor in. One is that, especially, man, you go to and I've been there to the Netherlands. I'm 5'6", man. I feel like I'm a midget there, because I go to Cambodia and everyone's 5 foot. I feel like King Kong, and I go there and I'm like almost a head smaller than everyone else. But so there's that. They're a bit taller, and then 2, there's a lot of rivers. The Netherlands is like, it's called like it means like the lowlands or the flatlands, and it's under a lot of water. And so there's a lot of rivers that run through it. And so in the wintertime, those freeze over, and people can skate on them going to work and stuff. So they have a lot more practice, right? So it makes more sense. It makes a lot of sense why they would do so well in that field. But just last question: what is your favorite winter sport?
The thing I like about, say, the Olympics is that you can get a bit of everything and you can pull them. But in terms of just like impressive feats, the figure skating, the insane level of practice and dedication. I mean, not to say that any of the others are not so. But I don't know. That one just gets me. Like, it's just like that is quite the feat. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not quite cosmology there, but it is still pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So going on to the next one, the next question I have for you. I hope you know, these are some little. It's gonna start to get a little bit deeper. Those are kind of some foundational ones, but we always start to heat them up, but we never let them get too hot. It starts to boil, and we might take the lid off the conversation and talk about something else, because I don't ever want these conversations to be contentious or mean spirited, you know. But
is it
but
all right?
let's just
Because
say
I
this.
want to just make sure that you can follow what I'm actually going on, because the science can get quite complicated. So just before we do, I just want to check that you're like, you can kind of see where I'm coming from with my previous answer about time and how it operates.
Well,
Terms of
okay,
the
so I was
beginning.
trying to get in there. I didn't want to interrupt you, but if you ever see the movie, I'm sure you saw the movie Ant-Man.
I might not have, actually.
Okay.
Oh,
well,
no, yeah,
guys,
no, I
it's
have.
really
No, I
funny.
have. Never mind. Sorry. I was thinking of something else. I've seen it, yeah.
But it talks in there about how he starts going into the quantum realm, and the guy's
that's
like,
garbage.
you do not. But he's like, you do not want to go there, because when you start getting down into that level, like your concept of time and space
don't.
will totally break down.
I watched that with a couple of my friends who were scientists, and we were all just sitting and going, like, before. I mean, they did make a joke of it in the movie, but it was just like they're just putting quantum in front of random things to make it sound sciencey. Like, that's their idea. That's not quite how it would. Yeah, that's not how anything would operate.
Yeah. Well, obviously, because it's a movie, but I mean, to understand this very concept that. Did you ever read? I believe it was a layman's guide to the galaxy. That like machine that they have where it'll let you experience the magnitude of the universe, and what it does is it makes you go insane. And I kind of had some very similar thoughts on that with God, because we're told, like in the Bible, if you see God, or at least in your physical state, that it would kill you. And I have obviously. Hold on. You gotta let me finish. Hold on. You gotta let me finish. Not interrupting is a big part of the channel. So, but let's just say, if God brought you back to life even after you died, see, He reconstructed you. That, like, you would know, in my opinion, you would no longer be able to do things like eat and breathe, because that would so blow your mind, it would just like fry your brain. And I maybe it called out the infinite or whatever, the size of the universe. Maybe God is all of the universe, but it seems like our minds are just not built in these little brains to comprehend things that big. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree that our minds are not, but I would change. I have to amend it slightly, in that I would say that our minds are not built, and by built I don't mean like intelligently built or designed in that sense, but they're not.
Touché.
They're not there in a sense that they are comprehending things on these tiny scales, like the quantum scales or the universe sort of general relativity and cosmos scales, are intuitive to us, rather than like we can't comprehend it or it's too much. I would say it's not intuitive. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't develop scientific understandings of it. Like quantum mechanics, one of the best things you can get for it is mathematical. Now, it's at this stage where the maths can predict things really well. It's just there's a lot of inherent uncertainty that is built into quantum mechanics. So that's not intuitive, but we can still demonstrate, we can still experiment. And so I take a slightly different approach. Yes, I'm happy to agree. It's probably not intuitive, but because it's not something that our brains are used to, or at least developed and evolved to actually understand. But it doesn't mean that we can't still develop theories of them, even if they don't sound intuitive. In which case is why I'm a big fan of, we need to be able to have evidence for it at that stage, because it's, intuition is actually not that reliable in science anyway. It can help give you an idea of where to go, but it won't tell you the answers very well. And so does that help? Does that give a bit more of my take on it?
So
I think we may not never be able to tell if there's other universes. It might just be a physical limitation, but we have to go with what we've got. And so it might get to the point where just like, I don't know. I have to see.
Yeah. So So okay, so a couple of things here. Yeah. So so I think starting off with just a limitation to understand there are limitations to what we could see and experiment on and do. So for example, some of these stars are so far away, the distances are just so astronomical. When scientists are actually saying that they discover a planet or something, they're not actually seeing the planet. What they're
But
seeing
they don't need
is
to.
what, but what they're seeing is they're seeing what the effect that they believe that that planet would be having on a star, for example. So the star might go dim, or you might see like a slight wobble in the middle of the star. So it's like you're not actually seeing what you think that, or you're not detecting. Maybe that is the detection, but you're not actually seeing the planet, right?
Yeah.
You want to get on that?
And a lot of
Go ahead.
things are that we do that are in science are in detections that we physically can't see, or at least can't see using what we would consider visible light. And yeah, I get that. And for a lot of people, that kind of messes with them. It does take a bit of getting used to. But at the same time, it's still very good evidence that there's a planet there, because
Sure,
you
sure,
run
absolutely.
models and say, what would we expect to see if there's a planet here?
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
expect to see this. And so we go out and
Yeah.
we test it. But that's why one of the reasons that they're launching, well, they launched the James Webb Telescope. They want to
Mhm.
actually physically see these exoplanets, because
Yeah,
we're
sure.
pretty damn sure they're there. All our
Yeah, yeah,
models,
yeah, yeah.
all our testing, simulations backed up by the data we can detect say there should be something there. So we're going to see,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
if we point the telescope and we can see it there, that's a really good. And so
yeah.
I see a lot of other sides of physics to try and keep it on point like that, in that it's like we
Mhm.
don't necessarily need to directly observe things to have a decent level of confidence that that thing
Sure,
is
sure.
probably true. Now,
And
again, as I said, it depends on how, like, what the evidence as to how confident you are. But it's like the planets thing. If you just saw a star wobble and you'd never, and that was it, I would
mhm.
say that's not enough. But if you'd run a
Uh-huh.
lot of models and said if the planet of this size was here on this star, we would expect to see this wobble,
Yeah,
and we can see it
sure,
elsewhere
sure.
where we know there are ones, there's closer ones. Then I was like,
Sure,
well,
sure.
now the case builds up, and so I see cosmology a lot like that,
Yeah.
and the Big Bang
Let,
itself in terms of understanding that expansion. Because I said I'm being careful not to go back to the to that point, because we can't go beyond the Planck
sure.
time, which is it basically means we can only go back in time so much before we hit a barrier that we just our physical
Right,
understanding can't
right.
get us further at this stage.
So here's the only thing I'm gonna, because obviously I could have never worked out those kind of science to make those kind of predictions, but I can look a bit to the past and take a look at science experiments that they used to do to try to figure something out. Because if you just take a look at the model of like the of our solar system, it would have made total sense to just assume that the Earth is just standing still and that the sun is circling around it, right? And so one of
Which
the
is why
things they
intuition is.
right, right,
Hmm.
right. But one of the experiments that they did to try to figure out if the Earth was actually moving was that they took a bowling ball or a rock. No, probably wasn't a bowling ball. They took a rock, a heavy object, and they dropped it on a tower. And it stands to reason that if the Earth was actually spinning, that that bowling ball would have actually moved. And so when it didn't move, it was like that's kind of obvious. Well, the Earth obviously is not moving; it's obviously standing still. But later on, the ideas of inertia were understood, and so it was understood that the motion was still going. So there was the Earth and the rock or whatever was moving at the same speed. So it could be the case that as we start to develop some understandings, like our models just don't make sense right now. Here's one other example that Carl Sagan, if you take a look at his little videos he used to make, he actually said that the universe was 30,000 light years across. Okay. Now they're telling us that the
I
universe
think that
is,
would be the galaxy. 30,000 light years would probably be the galaxy, not the universe.
sorry, universe. God, I always misspeak. Okay. The Milky Way. I'm sorry. The
Yeah,
Milky
yeah,
Way was
it's
30,000.
fine.
Okay. Thank you for catching me. So the Milky Way is 30,000 light years across. Now the scientists are telling us that the universe is 100,000 light years across. I'm sorry, the galaxy. No. The solar system is 100,000 light years across. So somehow between the last 40 years since he made that, our knowledge has increased 30%. Oh, sorry, 300% to know that the universe is actually now 100,000 light years across. I'm saying that. Hold on. I gotta finish the thought. The point is, though, is that if you actually listen to what the scientists, the models that they base that off of, there's no way they can actually know how far the Milky Way is, because we're trying to see like the forest from the trees. So we don't know how wide it is, because of the fact that we would need to escape our galaxy and get like a whole view. So we could do that to other galaxies, but the problem is like we're in the middle and we're trying to see out this way and that way, and there's no way to accurately measure that. But good, it's based off speculation. Did you see that?
It's two things. The second one is, you do have a good point that our perspective does limit us in that there are physical limitations. Though as our understanding gets better, we tend to find different ways of measuring things that allow us to get around some of those problems. Like I look at that 30,000 to 100,000, and I don't say that's a 300% increase in our knowledge or anything. I find that's a bit of an odd way of putting it, but it's more of, yeah, we will get more accurate over time and things will change as we learn new things. But that doesn't mean that certain things are likely to change. As I said, it's about probabilities. Well, no, not probabilities, but it's about levels of certainty depending on where we get to. So yeah, things like that we may not be able to know exactly. But our measurement now is going to be way more accurate. We're going to have a better understanding than it was however many decades ago. That's how science generally goes. Now, you mentioned the bowling ball one too. And my thoughts of that is, if they had launched that as a cannonball, you could measure the Coriolis effect, and you'd get a fairly decent measurement that the Earth was moving, because that's a rotational effect that if you can launch an object far enough, and I know even in World War I, artillery operators had to actually take the curvature of the Earth and Coriolis into effect, and they do now, that's a thing. So it's not necessarily that we have to change the science. The science itself is just a method. It's just how we come to understanding. Our understanding gets better. Yes, there are cases where sometimes it can go backwards briefly, but generally speaking, when it's done properly, as we get more information, our understanding goes up. So I tend to push back a bit on, it always changes and things like that. But I do agree with the fact that, yeah, we will have some limitations. And that does annoy me, that there are some things that in my lifetime I may never know. Like we physically may not be able to. But
I'm Molly Mushel. But no, I think so the point of me saying that is not to call into question the science. It's really not, because I'm not a Christian who's going to be like a science denier or say that the universe is 6,000 years old, because it's really not. It's more a matter of having humility in approaching these topics. So we have the RHE, respect, humility, and empathy, because it is just really trying to understand, look, we're doing the best we can to try to figure things out. And the same thing within Christianity. I have my own models that maybe are true, or maybe they're not true. But the reality is that if I pick up the Bible and I read it through, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense about it. Okay, like the Trinity doesn't make sense. Where God came from, how did he get here? Like, I can't make sense of any of that. So as I'm trying to figure these things out, I'm just talking about having humility and having respectful dialogue the way that we're having right now. But speaking of that, I do want to transition to another point, which is politics. And we're going to briefly talk about that. And are you ready for that? Ready for this change? Maybe we'll get back to the
I just want to add something to your point, that I agree that I wish more people considered, or at least more closely considered, how confident they can be with answers. For me, one of the reasons I'm not a believer is that I haven't seen the evidence for it. Now, as
Sure.
I said, someone could present that. I'm happy to wait for that. If that day happens, that day happens. It's great. But yeah, that for me, that kind of evidence side of it is such a huge thing for me. Is that,
Yeah.
And by evidence, I don't mean I need to physically see it. You don't need to put it in my hand. It can be like the exoplanets. And so, yeah, it is it's not, yeah, humility definitely plays a part. To be more pragmatic too, it's also what level, like how convincing is the evidence for what someone's claiming. And if I just haven't seen that, there are some things where I'd say the evidence would point in the other direction. I'd say, hence earlier I said, a purely literal understanding, but I don't think anyone really is a purely literal understanding, because I don't think that's how it was. And most people would say it was meant to be read. There are at least parts that are meant to be allegory, which is why I like using that, because I don't think I'll actually piss anyone off with that, because that's not what I'm here to. I'm not here as a theologian or as a philosopher. I'm here as a scientist. I just like science. It's fascinating. But I just wanted to add that in, that they're not mutually exclusive. Like that idea of, yes, we can't know everything and we have to be careful with what we do say. So, and I know this is not the point, and I'm happy not to get into it, but if someone was to try and tell me I believe X about the universe or about a religion or about a God, I'm like, okay, can you demonstrate how that, show me some evidence? It doesn't have to be direct. I'm not asking for someone to put something in my hand. But it has to be something that is at least repeatable. It has to fit within science. But as I said, science to me is a method. It's not a thing or an ideology. It's a process. And so we can be scientific without necessarily having to be scientists all the time, if that makes sense. I could...
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going a little off topic. I'm happy for you if you want to raid me in.
Yeah, I did want to transition over, but the thing is I would say, even if you did prove the Big Bang model and the Big Crunch 100% and proved all of that, I don't see how some would make a jump that there wasn't some kind of designer that put together the physics. I mean, if you want to make the jump, that's fine. I don't understand as a scientist why you would make that jump. That seems like a really big jump for me. Hold on. I want to transition. I want to hold on. Because I've been trying to transition. I'm just saying that. But what political ideology do you think is best in line with atheism? Do you think either communism or fascism is more in line under an atheistic model?
Okay, so I was happy to talk a little history too, but I do want to give a tiny bit of background to where these ideologies come from before I give that answer, because it gets so complicated. Because we're talking, early 20th century. So if we're talking communism, we can go back to 19th century with Karl Marx. But in terms of it actually appearing, at least attempts of it appearing in countries, we're talking, Soviet Russia. So the October Revolution, 1917.
1917.
So let's go back a little bit. So Karl Marx, when he wrote his Communist Manifesto, doesn't actually give he kind of lays out what it is, but he doesn't say how to get there. And so the people who've tried to actually establish communist countries for one reason or another have kind of had to take a lot of liberties. Now, there are things that he has said, but the main thing that defines it, and I did have this written down. Well, I had the definitions up, but the main thing of communism is to create a classless society by controlling the means of production. What that basically means is that there's no private property. So things, particularly for factories, for mines, things like that, they're owned by the state. The state determines prices and gives people their rewards, ideally, and I will get later down the track of why I think it would never ever work, based on ability, but it can never assess that fully under the actual system. It kind of defeats itself. But it came at a time, particularly in Russia, where things were not going very well for the for the common people. You still had a lot of people who were basically serfs. They were not quite slaves in name, but they were tied to the land. There was a lot of oppression, and people were starving. The Tsar was not particularly good at holding on to power, so Tsar Nicholas II. His father was, and his grandfather were much, like, they're a bit more oppressive. And so you've got this long history of this kind of tensions rising. And when World War I hits and things don't go well for Russia, it just, everything kind of boils over. And as I said, it wasn't the first revolution that gets rid of the Tsar and puts a provisional government in power. It was the second one that brought the communists to power. And basically they got in on saying, we're going to dismantle this. We're going to make it fair for everyone. We're going to make it classless. We're going to destroy this elite system where you're taking over. But one of the things that they saw, and Karl Marx does kind of write on this, is they did see religion as an enemy to that, not because they actually had any like inherent like I hate religion or anything like that. It was more of, it was actually, particularly when you look at how, say, Stalin dealt with it, and well, Lenin and Stalin, depending on how early you go, when they did take over and started dealing with the religious, it was more of that it was a threat to their control. So they had tried to replace and force their own version of the church on people. Yes, technically the Communist Union was atheist, though in World War II, because of pressures, they actually brought the church back to some degree. And really early on, they basically kicked out all of the priests and put their own people in so they could control it. So it's a really good example of why you need separation of church and state. Because it's like,
I agree.
Because you can get a theology, like a theocracy, which is not good, and you can get this. But it was more of because it was a threat to power. What they did is, instead of just leaving it saying we just don't believe in anything, they forced beliefs on people and they replaced it with have you heard of the term cult of personality?
Yeah, I've been in North Korea. I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, you've seen firsthand, and it's basically where you turn the leader himself into a deity, and you basically make it a state religion. And that's what happened in Soviet Union. I will make it clear, I don't agree with any of that. And so it was more of that they were atheists, but it was more in like name. It didn't, the fact that they didn't believe doesn't really determine the rest of it. Most of it came out of that control, and then how that control was subverted, because originally the Soviet Union was meant to be democratic. They were meant to hold elections, and they did try. They held elections. Lenin lost, got pissed off, and basically said, no, I don't like the result, and I am simplifying things, and said, no, we're not going to do that. I'm just going to be in power. You all just hate me, sort of thing, and they just took over by force. So it's really complicated. It's not a, oh, yes, it fits here. There's a lot of things into it. And the reason it doesn't work, at least from an economical point of view, is that when the government controls everything, all prices, you don't actually know what things are worth, because you need a sort of free market to actually you need sort of free markets to know what things are worth. And so eventually the economy either collapses under that system, or you need to make huge modifications to that system. So if you look at like Maoism, how it turned out is very different from like Stalinism and like the Soviet Union did. The fact that communist China is still around is kind of that, but they're almost communist. They're only communist to a point. They're very not.
Politically, like definitely communist. But if you take a look at their, I've been there, I don't know, maybe 6 times. I could tell you this: you'll find very few countries that are more capitalistic in a sense than China, because it's. I think they have a brilliant mix, because if you think about something, for example, like corruption and bribery and manipulating stocks and stuff, that could be really damaging to your economy and stability. So the way that they handle that in there is they just execute the people, which might be kind of good.
those kind of like I don't agree with those sort of dictatorships because it just doesn't end well.
Mhm.
Now the other half, sorry, I know that took a while, but I will get to the other half, and then I'll give my thoughts.
Because you didn't answer the question. You didn't answer the question.
Yeah, no, I'm getting there. So that because I needed to establish it because he's not simple. Fascism, on the other hand, it's actually fairly hard. It's a little less well defined, but the first person to actually establish fascism and the first proper fascist dictator was actually Mussolini. So, and fascism comes out of the name for faces. I think it has to do with the faces of various deities from the old but sorry, I need to review that point. Oh, you've gone blurry. Hopefully, you can still hear me. The camera just went.
Oh, Michael, you're welcome to come on here if you'd like to talk.
Yeah,
you're welcome. If you're interested, just put on down there. You can come enlighten us. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, so no, I'll just say on that, yeah, the Soviet Union did try and either control and then slowly eliminate the church. To a point, they did bring it back a bit when they realized they wanted every support they could get in World War II. But yeah, it wasn't as simple we're atheists, so we want to get rid of religion. It was a control thing. It was
right.
Stalin wanted to basically replace that with himself. And I think a survey a few years ago showed that 47% of Russians still approve of Stalin's administration efforts, which shows just how strong that indoctrination, that cult of personality was. But that is very, very different from just like the sort of thing I would identify as I don't believe. That is not the same. That is yes, they happen to be atheists, but they had a lot of other really damaging aspects to them that were the real reason things got bad. Sorry, back to fascism. Unless you need, unless you had something you need to add.
Hold on, let me comment because we got to try to have an open conversation here.
Sorry,
but
it's just
one
complex.
Of the things, one of the things with any leaders who did something really big, I mean, it could be like bad. Like just take like Alexander the Great. Absolute horrific person who tried to conquer the world. But if you go to Macedonia today, which is, they call it Fyrom, the former Yugoslavia Republic of Macedonia, right next to Greece, they have like this big statue of Alexander the Great. And that of course pisses Greece off because they're like, no, he was from Greece. It just happened to be in the same area, which is Macedonia. And the thing is, though, is that that's not someone you would think they should be fighting over to where is he actually from, because the dude is responsible for invading a lot of countries. But it's the same thing like with Napoleon or Stalin. If you just take a look at Stalin, he transformed Russia from being a country that was getting its butt kicked quite a lot in wars and mostly agricultural peasants, and he transformed it to within a couple of decades into a union that can compete with the United States. Obviously, they lost.
No. He did
really
even a huge damage.
Hold on, bro. This is my channel. You cannot interrupt. Okay, let me finish and then come in afterwards. Okay. This is what they think in their mind. That this is why they have put him in. I agree. Yeah, he totally damaged, but if you need to have people who you're like can rally around, like let's say like even Mao. There's a reason why Mao are still on display. Kim Il Sung in North Korea, that they still revere these people because it's kind of like a rallying cry for the country, the history. But go ahead.
Sorry, I just had to push back. There's with Stalin, his agricultural reforms destroyed the country. It caused the death of nearly 20 million people.
Yeah.
Because his understanding of agriculture, and basically they bought into, have you ever heard of Lysenkoism? So he was known as the barefoot scientist, Lysenko. Is basically a good example of what happens when you buy into pseudoscience on a big level. Mm-hmm. This was basically a guy who didn't believe in genetics.
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah, and Stalin bought into that, And on top of the collectivization of farms, which didn't help, but this just stupid, unscientific approach to it ripped their agriculture apart, and it took them decades to recover. Same thing, those ideas also got adopted by Mao as well, and in their Great Leap Forward, amongst other factors, helped to contribute to why so many people died. Basically, they bought into pseudoscience. Sorry, that was thing. Like, it wasn't that. And the thing is, Stalin wasn't originally the rallying thing. Is that he's a bit different. He took power sneakily, and once he was in, he just made sure that he eliminated any opposition and had a lot of propaganda to prop him up and to make him look good. But yeah, that is. I mean, I don't approve of that. I don't think that's anything. But yeah, it's a little. He's an interesting case. But most historians just describe Stalin as a thug. That's the one of the things they seem to agree on. That most of them agree he was a thug rather than he was this. So he was exactly that. But yeah, he was not good for that. In terms of reforming Russia to actually fight the wars, that gets really complicated, and it probably wasn't a lot him. He actually didn't help. It was the fact that he was almost dragged kicking and screaming to reform. But unlike Hitler, as the war went on, like World War II went on, he gave more power to his generals in terms of tactical decisions, operational decisions, whereas it went the other way around for Nazi Germany. And that, so it's not simple. There's no one factor. And so that's why I get on that. But so I did say I would also go to the fascism one. That one, fascist regimes tend to be extremely religious, or at least a company, like the people who they attract and support, tend to be extremely religious. The first treaty that Nazi Germany signed was with the Catholic Church. I think one of the first agreements Mussolini ever made was, again, with the Catholic Church. It's one of the reasons you actually go see the Vatican fairly cheaply, I think, kind of stems out of that. Again, it gets complicated. But Hitler himself was a Catholic, although the Catholics don't really like to accept him. He's a really weird brand of it. But a lot of the fascist ideals do go very, very in hand with really fundamental extreme versions of religion. He himself didn't believe in evolution. He mentions it once in Mein Kampf, and he mentions Darwinian evolution, that is, and he pretty much dismisses it. He was a really weird form of, like, it was like a pseudo, like, early proto young Earth creationist Catholic. He was odd. But it was like, it's an idea that almost no one would hold now, at least in its entirety. And it's just like, yeah, he had some weird ideas. But like, when all the things he did, at least in Mein Kampf and in his speeches, he does seem to be very religiously motivated, or at least in times he says he is. And I mean, the German army, the soldiers still wore Gottminites. Sorry, butcher the pronunciation, on their belt. God is with us. They would still have chaplains in their army. The understanding of, like, the traditional, like, Nazi man and woman was very rooted in very traditional church beliefs. Very much the stay-at-home wives, meant to have kids. That did change a bit as the war went on and they needed to get more people into the factory. But again, it's not an idea I approve of, or most people, at least in my country, even a lot of the religious people I talk to would approve of. But it was still, So in terms of which one you're more likely to, if you're an atheist, that you're likely to align with, if those are your only two options, then you would, by definition, communist, but not really. I disapprove of both. I wouldn't be either in a million years. And it would be like saying that, like, all Christians would be, like, does suicide bombing suit, Christians or Muslims more? It's a crazy question. It doesn't really make sense because it's not one factor. It's a complex story that just builds so much. But anyway, sorry, I know it's a long way to get there, but that's my very caveated answer.
Well, sometimes I ask that question, they're like, well, neither. But the thing is, neither isn't an option. I'm giving you two options. So if I said Do you want me to shoot you in the head with the with a sniper rifle or a handgun? You're gonna say, I don't want to get shot in my head, but 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 on the other hand, it's like, well, if you have to get shot in the head, you're probably going to choose a handgun. So I granted, okay, you might say neither of those are, but I will propose that you're talking about communism and why tens of millions of people dying, but that actually makes sense because at least under in kind of an atheistic, if you're basing it purely on atheism, because if you're trying to build a stronger society, then survival of the fittest would be something that you would want to have. And so, for example, in North Korea, when they were going through their famines of the 90s, the government just said, well, we'll stop feeding people. And what that's going to do is that's going to cause the elderly, the sickly to die off. And then people will, which they did start to do, resorting to cannibalism, which happened there, which I've interviewed North Korean refugees who have discussed that. So you can understand, you're saying, okay, well, kill tens of millions of people. Yeah, but if those are weak people who can't do work, and you don't see these people as having some kind of souls or intrinsic value. Like, I love the quote, and I believe it was by Stalin. It says, the death of one person is a tragedy, but the death of a million people is a statistic. So that's why I'm saying.
I think it was. It sounds like him, but I don't approve of like that sort of thinking. So
yeah, I'm not saying you're a communist or fascist. I'm not saying anything like that. But I'm just saying, if this is what you're proposing hardcore materialism, which is what they do in North Korea. And then you say, well, we're not making any other. You just say, well, atheism is just a belief about one view. Well, no, it's not, because certain things are going to follow logically as a result of that. It's like it is going to there's certain things that will be implicit as a result of that. So I don't really think it's appropriate whenever atheists say, well, this is the only thing that we're claiming. No, it's not the only thing that you're claiming. There are other results that are, and I would say both these kind of abusive regimes can be a result of that. But I do want to go on to the next question here.
Though I just want to ask, but are you actually comparing me to any of those people, or saying if I was in power in those countries, I would take the same steps?
I have no idea, because this is our second conversation. But I'm not saying in principle that you are or you aren't.
Because I do just strongly disagree with it, because they were atheists. No, it was a power thing. It was a control thing. It was like if you look at Stalin, it was about power and control.
No, I mean,
yeah. Compare it to Nazi Germany. They were definitely religious, and look at how many people they wanted to kill. The estimates for if they'd actually beaten Russia, they would have killed probably. Well, actually, if they'd taken over the world, they probably would have killed a third of the world off.
Yeah,
and they were like anti-evolutionists, or at least Hitler was. Mussolini, I'm not as familiar with. So it's not. And look at Japan. If you want to look closer to home where you are, you can look at Japan, because they were technically a fascist regime, though their government gets really complicated when you look at World War II. Mm-hmm. It wasn't straightforward. And look at what they did. They were religious, to not probably to the same degree that some people like to say about worshipping the emperor quite as a god. That's not as straightforward as that. But look at what they did. And they went down all these routes, and that had nothing to do with it. They were fascist. It's a control, it's a power, and it's what happens when you think you're better than someone else. And that was what happened in a lot of these regions. Russia, as I said, a lot of the people died because Stalin didn't like the opposition, or because it was just from famine. It was kind of this, I'm going to a goal and the leader doesn't care. It's not, I don't think has anything to do with the fact that he didn't believe in a god. Like, Stalin was educated in a seminary.
Yeah, that doesn't mean anything, though. I mean, I was educated in a seminary, and I became an atheist as a result of as I told you, being around a bunch of I understand if you went to seminary and like, yeah, this obviously is not true, because that doesn't make any difference if you say that he went to seminary, or if you even said he was a priest, because people can change their ideas, So So that's kind of a moot point in my opinion. But
sorry, I just
so
also noticed. Oh, sorry, I did notice a
Good.
comment I wanted to
Sure.
comment on,
Good.
if I may. The points that Michael is making, because it does touch on something I mentioned earlier. The last few, so those last few, when Hitler talks about evolution in that sense, he's not talking about Darwinian evolution. He's talking about Lamarckian evolution, or a version of it where it wasn't a like natural selection, it was an ambition-driven like ladder system. It's not one that was accepted. And yes, you can argue bits of maybe social Darwinism got in there, but that's not what I would refer to. I don't adhere to that. I would be like secular humanist or closest to that if I had to pick a worldview, because
absolutely.
The way I see it is that, yes, I don't see there's a higher power, but that doesn't mean that, people are worthless. No, the meaning of my life is what I mean to other people, and I see people as important. So that's why I strongly disagree that these are the necessary result of like not believing in a God. That's just not the case. I think that
I didn't say that though. I did not say that.
You did with the regimes. You said it was kind of, you went down the natural selection, or people don't have a lot of worth. That's more of what I was replying to. Sorry if I wasn't clear on that.
Well, I haven't yet made the case because you've been mostly speaking. So I haven't really had an opportunity to make my case that I would argue. Because this guy is actually making some of it, Michael, in here. But I think we would have to unpack this one. We'd probably spend the next 2 hours trying to unpack this topic right here, because it is a lot more, it is complex and it is a bit nuanced. But I will say this, that the Nazis did have an idea of ethnic superiority, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know, maybe they might say God did it, but they would also,
Hitler did.
They did a lot to say that their genetics was based, their genetics, and they did a lot to, like, for instance, study the jaw lines and the noses and stuff.
Yeah, but there was a lot of superstition built on that. And like in the first chapter of Mein Kampf, Hitler says, "I believe I'm doing God's work in eliminating the Jews." It was the reason they believed they were superior, at least some of them. And again, this is why, because fascist regimes are not as organized as they like to appear, because they tend to have a front of a lot of discipline, but they actually aren't. They're generally really unorganized. And if you actually look at the internal workings of Nazi Germany, that becomes quite clear. A lot of it was built on kind of ideas that were very highly kind of motivated by superstition, to say the least.
Yeah. So okay. Let me ask you a quick question. I'll get back to Hitler for a second, but do you believe that Donald Trump believed a lot of the things that he said whenever he was talking about his views? Do you believe he actually believed those things?
He believed some of them. I have no idea of telling. But what's important is that what he got people to do with what he said, that the people who were following his orders believed it. And so it was done in the name of the things he said. So that's why and I'd say it's the same thing for a lot of the leaders, that I don't know, like, it'd be interesting to know if they actually did believe, and we probably never would, but it's what the people did under what they said. So it's more of these things were done directly, like as I said, and Hitler, like, directly in the name of some really, really poor versions of what people call Christianity. I don't think many people, well, I mean, there might be a few. I mean, there's almost certainly a few, but most Christians would agree just as strongly as I did that the Nazis were wrong. Like, that's a given. But part of it was motivated by that. And again, this is why history is not simple. It's not one factor. This equals that. It's lots and lots of factors that are interwoven that weave the tapestry of how things play out. And that's why it's very hard to say, yes, definitively, this is it, that's it.
Yeah.
So I wish I could have a better answer.
In no possible world is Hitler a follower of Christ. That is absolutely true. And I will say this.
He said he
So
was.
the reason,
He believed. He
hold on,
probably believed he was.
bro, you got to let me finish. You got to let me finish because this has been like 90%, 10% in this conversation. But um, one of the things that I saw Donald Trump doing, which was so disturbing, is like, we're going to throw out so many lies that for you to try to disprove every single lie is going to take up so much amount of your time. It's just going to completely exhaust you. So, for example, from day one, he was talking about how he had the biggest victory ever, and he had the biggest parades ever, the biggest crowds, and all this stuff was just categorically not true. So he lied so frequently, so much. It's like almost you don't even want to like. It's gonna if you try to unpack every lie he's saying, it's gonna take up too much of your time. So with Hitler, he had a similar idea, him and Goebbels, as far as propaganda, is that if you keep lying enough times, then a lie is going to become a truth. So the fact that he would hijack some ideas about Christianity whenever you have a population that's mostly Catholic or Lutheran, it just totally makes sense. And have you ever seen the movie Book of Eli?
Yes.
With the Yeah. So
I
Denzel
didn't quite
Washington
like it
has
though.
yeah, it's a good book, but it's very, very accurate because Denzel Washington has the last Bible, and this guy who's built this little small town, he's really trying to get his hands on that Bible, and he's literally will go through anything to get his hands on that Bible. And so essentially what he says at the end is the guy, his henchman, cannot figure out why he wants the Bible so much. And it's because he says it's not a book. He says that's a weapon that's aimed at the hearts and the minds of the weak or the masses, right? So if you can take that and flip it around and try to just pull out one thing here and one thing here and take this out of context and take that out of context and not look at the whole thing, then yeah, you could twist it in some pretty disturbing ways. And so if you're just being objective here, I would have to put this up here. In no world was Hitler a follower of Christ. Did he understand that there were a lot of people around him that were Christians and that he could hijack the message? Absolutely. But I do want to go on to another line of questioning.
Yeah, that's fine.
Hold on. I want to go on to the next line of question. I do want to go on to the next line of questioning because we're already a little bit over.
May I quickly?
Good.
So it was just it was the Book of Eli one. I actually do want to get your opinion on this. If the book is inspired by, I'm assuming you believe in an all-loving God as well, an all-powerful one. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If God is all-loving and all-powerful, why did he make his book so easy to manipulate like that?
Part of it, I would say that's a very intentional thing to do. Because yeah, on surface level, I would say God is just absolutely incompetent to write a book that easily misunderstood, or that could be either so easily taken out of context or illogical in some other aspects, right? Or he could have explained things in a way that people like me are going to be able to understand and not be so confused, because it can be really confusing and contradictory at times, right? So if he did, let's just assume for a second that he did write it, then I would have to say that was something that's very deliberate and very intentional. Because if you go by, and again, we're in this universe, so you're with me in this universe, and I'm just answering the way I would answer as a Christian, okay? Because if God creates perfection, which is like in heaven, it doesn't make sense why he turns around and creates earth afterwards and then reveals himself. Like, you would expect God to create earth first and then later on build like a better creation later on. So that already is starting to become illogical, and you have to understand that there's probably some reasons why that's going on. So I would think, this is total deduction, this is total inference from just reading the Bible, is that if God created heaven first and he created perfection first, we wouldn't have any doubt that God exists in heaven. We're told that like God is the light of heaven, like there's no sun. So God's light gives all the light in heaven. And you wouldn't have any doubt whether or not God exists. And furthermore, if he created you with a perfect body, you wouldn't understand heat or cold or hunger or things like that. So I believe that this is existing for a temporal state, temporary, that we are confused as to knowing God's existence. And, you know, there's people like you who haven't experienced God. And so this is actually like a gift that God is giving us for a while to teach us some lessons that we need to learn in heaven, but we wouldn't be able to learn those unless we have the state of confusion that's going on here. But I do want to go to the last. I mean, we'd have to unpack that one for hours. We could unpack that one for hours right there, which is why I probably should have only picked one topic for, but we did have two. So I do want to get to one last line of questioning. I do want to ask you, and then we'll try to close out in the next 10 minutes. But okay, so let me preface this for a second. I was not saying that if you become an atheist and you lead a country or you're president, that you're just going to go and commit genocide, because that's obviously not the case, because a lot of atheists do tend to be more humanist, secular humanist. So that's obviously the best direction for societies to go, into secular humanism. You would agree with that, correct? Secular humanism?
For the most part. I mean, without getting into to tiny details, I'm willing to grant that one for the conversation.
Yeah. Because I believe in secular humanism as well, and I'm a Christian, okay? But as far as the government goes, I don't want the government involved. But that being said, do you feel like there's positions that, as an atheist, in your community, it's like that you feel obligated to hold, okay?
No.
Do you feel that?
The only one that I really hold is I don't believe in a God. That's it. That's all.
Okay, but that's not the question I asked you.
No, I don't have any beliefs that I feel obligated to hold. No.
No, from the community. From the community.
Yeah. So one of the things I like about at least the small community that I interact with is they're actually pretty big on, no, we want different opinions. I don't feel obliged to hold anything. And in fact, I know I hold different opinions to others that I interact with on, I mean, you're familiar with Six Pack. Like, I know I hold different opinions to other people on the panel, and it doesn't bother me. I don't want everyone to agree with me. I don't expect everyone to agree with me, because it's when someone has a disagreement and you can sit down and be like, all right, I got to explain my view, or I've got to consider theirs. That's when you can learn. So, yeah.
Okay. So what do you think would be the response to you if you were to come out and say that I'm pro-life? Like, would you be accepted still into the community?
I would still be accepted into the community. I would just have a few people disagreeing with me, although I do know, and I'm not going to actually talk on personal beliefs, but I do know of a few people in the community who would agree with me if I came out and said that position.
They would disagree with you? Is that what you said?
Sorry?
You said they would disagree with you?
They would disagree with me on that point, but I would still be part of the community, if that makes sense.
Okay.
As in the same fact that you might have different opinions on God, slightly different opinions, but that doesn't mean you're not a Christian, just because another Christian disagrees with you. If that kind of makes sense.
But I am pro-choice because I'm a social libertarian. So if I make that opinion known, that's something that could get me instantly kicked out from a lot of Christians. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. But I don't think it goes around the other way as much. Yes, I'm sure there are circles that you could get kicked out of, but there are definitely atheist communities that won't kick you out. And it's quite confusing because they're not defined by that. It depends on exactly where you are. Again, exactly like, well, to a lesser extent than saying with your one. But yeah, I don't, like, I'd still be an atheist regardless of those sorts of views. I just have certain people who disagree.
Okay. But you see, the same thing applies to like if I were to say the same thing about gay marriage, I mean, I'm personally opposed to gay marriage, but like, I don't see why I have any political right to go and tell two gays that they can't be as miserable as I am in my marriage. I don't understand why they'd be fighting for that right, because no, I'm not going to go down that route. Just joking. But I'm a social libertarian. So, but if I say that to a Christian, they instantly say, "Oh, no, 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 you're pro gay marriage," and I'm like, "No, I'm not pro gay marriage. I personally disagree with that, but it's not something I feel like I need to go get involved with in someone's personal life. I don't feel any necessity. All right, but that's something that could get me kicked out, and people would say, "Well, you're not a real Christian if you believe that." But I'm like, hey, I believe God's given us free will. If someone wants to do that, or if someone wants to transition, let's say transition, that's their own personal, their own personal right. They have to live with the consequences of their actions. So that's not something I want to get involved with. But then from the atheistic community, if I make that same exact opinion known, they say, "Oh, no, that's not right, because you need to say that homosexuality, you personally agree with homosexuality." And so if I don't do that, or if I don't agree with but if I don't agree that transitioning is something that's going to help a person, that's my own personal opinion, that's something that will get me excommunicated from that group of people to make my opinion known on the matter. It's not that it's based out of hate, that it's based out of bigotry, or based out of trying to hurt anybody. It's that I genuinely believe it. If I get disproven, I'll have to change my ideas on that. But I genuinely believe that that's something that's going to hurt somebody. So again, if you disprove me, that's another thing. But to say that I'm hateful, that I want to hurt people, is really inaccurate. You know what I'm saying?
I can see where you're coming from, but I think there's a slight confusion here. If you're referring to some recent events with certain members, yes, there are certain members who will get really angry, but it's slightly different. It's not that they're saying you must hold their views. It's that they're saying that
Oh, yes, they are.
the views you hold, even if not directly, may enable more dangerous views to be held. It would be like if you said, "I'm pro people inserting battery acid into their veins." That wouldn't get me kicked out of the atheist community, but they would rightfully so tell me that that is a dangerous view that can get people hurt. That's I think, more of what, at least from what I've seen. And yes, there are individual members everywhere, but as I said, that's not going to get me necessarily kicked out of the community. I may, of course, get alienated if I carry on like a bit of a douche about it, but that's separate. But those are not issues I tend to go too much in, because I just don't know. But for mine, my opinion is very much on what does the medical science say, and if the medical science shows that a certain condition is not a choice and that certain decisions are better for that person, then you should not get in the way of that. That should be their decision.
Yeah.
And
well, I never talked about. Oh, sorry.
No. I was just making that clear. Because that's not something I tend to discuss. But yeah. I think there is a little bit of a difference there, and that's why I quite like the battery acid, because most people will agree going around telling people they should inject battery acid into their veins is a dangerous view, and rightly so. If people come out and say that is actually harmful to say to people, that's not them necessarily kicking you out of a community, but trying to say the views that you hold are dangerous. And as I said, I'm not afraid of people disagreeing with me, because that's how I do figure out if the views that I hold are wrong or even potentially dangerous. I don't want to hold views that are potentially dangerous. I don't want to hurt people. That's not my goal.
Hey, can I ask you real quick? This is a side tangent, but what ethnicity are you? Are you Jewish?
No, I'm well.
You're not.
I was born in Australia.
But like ethnicity though?
In a mix of kind of Anglo-Saxon and Middle Eastern.
Oh, okay. I was thinking you had like kind of with the beard, and I was thinking a little bit more Middle Eastern, and I actually got to spend about a week in Palestine, learning learning from the Muslims down there. It was really interesting, very empathetic experience. And I just want to close off. I'll give like a 2-minute little soliloquy here, because I got a chance to go in and learn with as they said, with the Muslims, and they welcomed me in. You know, they taught me about Islam, they fed me, and that to me was the most one of the most eye-opening experiences of my whole life, because I got to see that these people were just as human as me, and they had things like a sense of humor. You know, in fact, I would never believe this, but these guys were making like bathroom jokes, you know, like inside of a mosque, which is pretty freaking funny. I'm not sure if you know this, but God, this is funny. But Muslims, they don't shake with their right hand because that's like the area you wipe with, so they shake with their left hand. And so I saw one of these guys. He got the other guy by the hand and started kissing him on his right hand, and he was like yanking his hand away. But I did see them making, you know, jokes, and they were serving each other, and you know, they were welcoming me, and they were going out and trying to find some Muslims who had stepped away from their faith and tried bringing them back. And I think just, you know, when you get to spend time with people and try to understand really where they're coming from, especially like the topic that I know you know what's going on, it's like, let's just assume, for example, let's just assume that I am like bigoted in that area, which I'm not, but let's just assume that I am. Like, do you think calling me names or trying to block me, exclude me from groups, like, do you think that's going to make me any better? Or do you think that, like, if I'm going to learn, hold on, if I'm going to learn from this situation, I need to be interacting with trans people or people from the LGBT community. I need to be treated like I have an opinion that's, you know, maybe it's not completely valid, but I am a human and I do have a right to have an opinion that disagrees with you. And if you want to change my mind, calling me the F word or bigot or saying that I'm hateful, that's not going to do a lot to help out your cause. Now, I'm someone who will take on Christians from my own community who are being bigoted and hateful and transphobic or homophobic. I will take on my own community. But on the other hand, it's like, if I'm being treated like this from this community, that makes me not want to even put my neck out there, because whenever I stand up for this community, I get attacked from my own side. And then this other side says, well, you're not affirming enough, and so we're going to attack you from this side. So I get attacked from both sides. But yeah, do you want to say something?
My opinion on that, it depends on the circumstance. I'm all for not calling names directly, but when if I was to say get into a heated discussion, I call someone an idiot, I'm not saying overall you're an idiot. I'm saying this idea of yours is idiotic. That's I think idiotic. Generally what happens, but that's slightly separate. I think it's a little different when you're online, that it becomes about platforming, because it's not necessarily your view or changing your mind. And by that, we can make this a hypothetical about any individual when I say you, if you would like.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
It's about whether we should allow those views to be platformed, whether we should give that an audience. Because let's go back to my battery acid thing. Or actually, no, I'm pretty sure you're happy with vaccines, right? You'll take the vaccines, yes? Like say
I got my 2 vaccines. I got 2 vaccines.
Good. I'm on board. Do you think that it's right to give a really strong, like give someone who is an anti-vaxxer a big platform where they can influence millions of people to take the wrong decision without stepping in and saying, no, that's wrong? Do you because as I said, to me, it's not, when it comes to this public platform that's a little different from private, I think that you have to be careful with that platforming issue. And what the exact answer is, I don't know. I'm personally reasonably patient, but I will draw the line at some point. If someone keeps saying, if someone is shown to be a liar about something, I won't be keen to give them a platform. If somehow letting them on was going to get them more views, it really depends on the circumstance. To me, names and someone calling me stupid or an idiot over something doesn't bother me as much, because I said it's more to do with that idea. That's how I see it. So it does depend, and I'm trying to keep careful not to go too down the rabbit hole of where we know where that part of the conversation is coming from, because it depends. If someone keeps coming out and saying, I'm going to support this view, or I'm pro, or I'm all for this, but at the same time will also say things that are somewhat, I guess, hateful. Again, I'm trying to keep this as hypothetical as I can. Then I would say I'm personally not going to go and swear at them, because I don't swear. I'm not likely to call them names, though I may tell them that they're flat out wrong or they are being stupid, something along those lines. But I would probably stop platforming. I would stop interacting with them pretty quickly. In the sense that I wouldn't give them a platform. I would still, to a point, discuss with them. But if their ideas, if it's clear that they're not willing to have a conversation, they're not willing to learn, and they just want to talk, that would also play into it. So it really depends on the person and the circumstance. So it's not a straightforward yes or no. I don't agree. Like I'm all for people disagreeing with me, and I know a lot of the people that I interact with and the people that I'm quite close to in the community are for that, as long as the conversation can go both ways and you show that you are willing to listen. If you sit down and, as I said, like if it comes to the point where it's clear that you're not willing to let this go back and forward, you're not willing to at least listen, you don't have to agree with everything the other person says, then that's different. But again, this is just more my general opinion than without getting too specific.
Speaking about platforming, I'm sorry normalizing atheism, whoever you are, but I'm not going to platform you right now. I'm a matter of trying to connect with people and trying to humanize people and trying to build bridges. So you obviously want to build some kind of walls here, and I'm not interested. I'm not playing your game, so I do apologize. But I do want to tell you one quick thing. Thank you for that, by the way. But okay, so we're supporting 5 different nonprofits here, and I want to give you an option to pick one to donate to, that we donate on behalf of our interlocutors. I hate that word, our guests. But one is an anti-bullying campaign for the LGBT community, done by a former NFL player, Sarah Tualo, who's homosexual in the NFL. It caused a lot of issues for him. So now he's helping LGBT youth. North Korean refugees, they bring attention and help to assistance to people in North Korea. Another one is single mothers in South Korea, called Kumpa. They help. It's really difficult for single mothers here in South Korea, which is why you see a lot of Korean people sending their kids overseas. Very big, very sad issue that Korean people don't adopt their own kind. But okay, single mothers. We also do. Sorry, I'm still thinking about this one. Do any of those right there? Let's see, we do that. Oh yeah, we do another one, a Nazi organization, which is helping ex-Nazis to deconvert, helping Nazis to deconvert from KKK members. And again, the key to de-radicalizing those people is actually by them getting to know people from the other, the people who they hate. That is like 100% of the time when they deconvert is them meeting people. So they have their own prejudices and ideas about them, but when they can interact with them themselves, it is like you can never punch that out of someone. You can never punch that hatred outside of them. They need to be overcome with compassion and respect and love. So there's that one, and then there's the Palestine and Jewish organization. The Palestinians are actually former Nazis, which is amazing. They're former Nazis, and now they work with slain Jewish, the parents of slain Jewish civilians. So I want to run these down. They work for peace, so it's a great organization. I got to see them in Palestine. But LGBTQ, North Korea, single mothers, South Korea, helping the Nazis deconvert, or Palestinian and Jewish organization. Which one is
that's a difficult one. They all sound pretty good.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I do like the helping to deconvert more because that was actually something we kind of touched on today. So I feel like that would be a touching,
Sure, sure. Okay.
relevant one. But it's hard because
Yeah.
I feel like I'm taking away from the
I
others. They're all
know. I
it
know.
doesn't help. Like they're
Okay,
all
I'll tell you what.
great.
Okay, pick one more. Pick one more. Since you're saying that, pick one more.
Oh. So just give the list again. I just want to hear them once for
LGBT, North Korea, single mothers, or Palestine. Pick one more.
don't like. Oh, this is such hard to see. Let's go with
I
the
know.
first one because that one also
Okay.
kind of got touched on a little
Yeah,
bit, and
yeah.
then that way, well, at least towards the end, in yeah. Oh, that's not. Yeah, it's kind of like can we just split it
Yeah.
between them all?
I know, right? I'm really passionate about all of these. I think that you know, we can have honest disagreements, and still totally respect each other and love each other. You know. But do you have any like 2 minute last thoughts, and then we'll wrap up?
Not really. I just hope that people can that we look at the evidence and we do things based on what we can show to be true, and that we work towards leaving the world a better place than we found it in. That would be my parting comments.
No, that's a good point, and I do want to springboard off of that for 1 second, because when we're discussing science, there are some gaps in there, and there's some things that we're observing, and it could be later on find out that the observations that we've made aren't even accurate. You know, I mentioned the bowling ball, but the planets, um, finding planets, and I will say this: that one thing that is absolutely demonstrably shown to be proven right now is that love absolutely trumps hate. You know, hate, we know where hate is going to get us. We know where disrespect, we know where assuming the worst about the other person, we know where that's going to get us. And so if we want to sit around and try to gaslight and demonize the other side rather than taking a look inwards, we also know where that gets us. That may make us feel better at the time, but it's not going to move us forward as a species. So I do want to end off in that and saying that some of this stuff maybe is theoretical, but we know absolutely that the things that we could be doing to making this world a better place for all of us. So that being said, don't forget to check us out at www.rhepodcast.com. Having respectful conversations like this, not assuming the worst, trying to see the best sides of the other's position. Check us out at Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can also find us on Spotify. And if you'd like to come on as a guest, you can check us out at email us at rhepodcast@gmail.com. And we definitely look forward to seeing you back again. And we are going to leave you with this ending video. Thank you for joining us. Bye.